Howdy. We're going to do a bonus episode with Dr. Cindy Devers on PhDs and all the nuances of that, and then the connection with being tenure track faculty in a large research institution. I get calls and emails all the time from former students, prospective students, friends of friends of friends about getting a PhD. And so I'd love to be able to capture all of these answers in one place and then carry on those conversations in a more individualized way. So I thought you'd be the perfect person to do that since you're the PhD coordinator for the management department.
Okay.
And have a PhD, obviously. But thought that would be a good conversation. So can you describe the job of a tenure track professor in a business school at a tier 1 research institution? What is that like?
So we teach a few classes. So the standard load right now for a tenured professor or a tenure track professor in a large research school is 3 classes a year. And so some people stack them. I teach more than that. I teach a couple overloads. I teach in all the MBA programs that do exec ed. But I can choose to do that or not do that. Most of us can choose the classes that we want to teach. Sometimes there's classes that, obviously they come up and we take them. But it's 3 classes is a standard load, which is nice because we have to do research. That's our primary job. So one of the things I like about Mays, and it's not this way at every school, is that we care about teaching, because there's a lot of schools that you only care about research. And so as long as people aren't knocking the dean's door down, complaining about you as a professor, if you're publishing, that's okay. And that's not okay here. I think it's you have to be a good teacher. You don't have to be a super great award-winning teacher, but you have to be a good teacher. And it's kind of interesting as you look at the professors in our department, and we have some really great professors in all of Mays. Who are also prolific researchers. And so that's different than at many schools. There are a lot of schools that share this. You have to be a good teacher too. But I think most are, it's really about research. And if you win teaching awards, but you don't publish, you don't get tenure and you don't keep your job. And so it really is about doing research. And that's the thing that in a PhD program, why you can't work while you're doing our program is because you're required to learn how to do research. And that's something that's completely new to most people. Some people that come through a psychology program have been in a lab and they know what that is. But, I had an MBA and I had some statistics courses. Then I got the PhD program and I had no idea what this was. What is this research thing, right? And it's not about writing an HBR. It's not about telling people what to do. It's describing people's behaviors and describing firms' behaviors and trying to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, but not telling them how to do it. Now, my research and others, we try to take our research and distill it and transfer it into the classes that we teach, right? So it pops up in my negotiations course or my strategy course or my M&A course when I teach it for the executive MBAs. But it's still about, it's not what I do and it's not what I write about. And if they read my research papers, they'd be bored to death, right? And so it's a very different type of thing. So the research is the biggest part of our job. It's, they call it a 3-legged stool. It's teaching, research, and service. So the service is doing, serving on committees or serving as the DPC coordinator, the doctoral program coordinator, or now I'm associate department head. So those are kind of service roles that we do. Or serving externally. So we want to have our department be seen for like the Academy of Management or the Strategic Management Society. So, we hold offices in those. So those are service kinds of roles. I was editor of a journal or associate editor of a journal at one point. And so those are what we call service roles and they're volunteer. You don't get paid for them, but it counts. And as you're evaluated, we look at those 3 dimensions. So it's teaching, research, and service, but it's really research, and then teaching service. It's pretty much how it is.
Which I think is a common misconception. I'll have someone call me and say, hey, I want to teach at the university. I want to get a PhD. And I'll say, well, that's great. But if you get a PhD and come tenure track here at Mays Business School, you're really going to do a lot more research than you are teaching, which is a great profession for a lot of people. But you have to be good at both. And I think if you only think you're going to come in and teach after getting a PhD, then that may not be the path for you.
Right.
But there are many other paths to work in a business school,
Mm-hmm.
even at a tier 1 research institution. We have executive professors who, when our listeners have heard from some of those, like Sydney Donnell, who have had long careers and then come and be an executive professor
Sure.
here. Or lecturers who maybe have had 5+ years of experience in the workforce and then come back here to teach. And those are all options,
Mm-hmm.
but they look different. A lecturer job maybe doesn't have a PhD, maybe does,
Mm-hmm.
but is more of a professional track faculty member and instilling some of their experience into the classroom and teaching a lot more. A lecturer, for example, would teach 4 classes a semester.
Mm-hmm.
So they have an 8-course load over the course of a year versus a tenure track
Sure.
that has 3. And the pay is quite different. So you're coming in at much lower pay as a lecturer than you would as a tenured faculty, but you have different credentials
Right.
when you come in. So there are other ways to get here, but you have to understand the trade-offs of if you come in without a PhD in business from a top university, that's going to look different. That job's going to look different. The responsibilities are going to look different. The pay is going to look different
Right.
than it would if you come in with a PhD from a top-tier business school.
So I don't know if you had this experience when you did your PhD, but we don't teach people how to teach.
Yeah.
So you get a PhD, you're not going to learn really necessarily how to teach. You're going to teach a few. So our PhD students teach 3 classes. So their first 2 years, they're just research assistants. And then their 3rd, 4th, and 5th year, they teach 1 class a year. And so, that's all they get. And so we do try to train them to teach. But, most programs don't. They just throw you in the classroom and hope you can do it.
Mm.
And so we actually, Steve Courtwright put together a training program. So we actually have them sit in a faculty class, and then we have them go to teach. We do brown bags, and we talk a lot about teaching, because if you're a good teacher, it feels a lot better. You're a lot more comfortable. It can be really fun. It gets you away from doing the research, and you can talk about the practical side of your research, but it makes your job a lot easier because you're not sweating about it. Students aren't lining up outside your door complaining about their grades. And so, we tell them as part of their job, you're going to teach and you should be good at it. And I think that you have to be very competitive to be a good researcher. And so you like to be good at it. And so I think most people are good researchers, can be good teachers because they want to be good at it. And so they work at it.
What makes a good researcher? I think people can imagine what makes a good teacher because they've had teachers.
Right.
What makes a good researcher?
You have to be really, really curious. You have to really have some burning questions, and you have to want to answer them. And you have to want to answer them when you don't want to answer them,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know this. When you're doing your dissertation, you're really excited about it, and by the time you're done with it, you never want to see it again. I never published anything out of my dissertation because I couldn't go back to it because I couldn't stand it after working on it for so many years, right?
Yeah.
But you just have to be really curious, intellectually curious. You want to know things. Right. And so my kids are always like, you ask me too many questions because I want to know stuff. I was always like that. Right. So
I think that's a really good point. And you alluded to something in that statement of the diligence. You have to want to answer the questions even when you don't want to answer the questions. Right. It's a long process. So I finished my PhD in 2017, and I'm still working on publishing articles from the PhD or from the dissertation. And so I'm on my 3rd right now. And it's just long. That's 2 years that I've been working on that. And it's just a long process to turn an article around, to get it reviewed, to then respond to the reviewer comments and get it out. And you just have to be very diligent we've talked about writing discipline. I write for an hour a day. And you just have to keep writing, and it'll keep moving forward. Right. And when you have other obligations like teaching or service, it's hard to keep moving that needle forward. Right. And so you have to be pretty disciplined, pretty diligent, pretty okay with the monotony, because sometimes it's super interesting. Like you start getting your findings, and you're like, oh my gosh, this stuff on reputation is great, but
But then you go through the revision process, and then you're just sick of it. And you're like, by the time a paper comes out, I just published a paper. It took 12 years. Now, it went to one journal and got rejected, and then we fixed it and sent it to another one. And then it went through a series and went through, I think, 7 iterations with the editorial team. And, it was like horribly long. And so by the time it came out, we were like, oh, yeah, that. It's so anticlimactic.
You should be excited. And it's like, oh. Well, and the other thing is, because it might take 12 years, I mean, that's not the norm.
It's not the norm, for sure.
But it does take a long time.
A couple years is
for
sure.
Totally the norm. And so you have to have multiple projects going at the same time so that you have a pipeline of things that are coming out.
And not everything's going to hit. That's the hard part. You work so hard on a paper for years, and then it doesn't go anywhere. And you just have to be able to stop and cut it off, right? We call it escalation of commitment to a failing paper. You have to stop. You can't do it. And there are some people that just can't ever let it go. And sometimes we're just like, look, you got to let it go.
Yeah, sunk cost.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So you've talked about a few things that factor into this question, but what is tenure and what do you have to do to earn tenure?
Yeah.
So and I think in the context of someone thinking about doing a PhD in pursuit of a tenure track job, what are the things they need what are the things they need to know that they're going to have to do when they graduate from that PhD?
You have to publish. And so, it's going to differ depending on where you go. So if you're going to go to a Texas A&M, you're going to go to Arizona State, you're going to go to Florida, Michigan State, any of the top Research One schools, you're going to have to publish what we call a top-tier journal article on average at least once a year. And that doesn't sound like a lot. It's a lot.
Well, and like we said, it may take 2 years for each article.
Exactly.
So that's a lot.
Right, exactly. And so if you're thinking about a PhD, then you have to think about, okay, if I'm going to go to a top school, they're going to so it's like the MBA program, right? So we bring in just a few students. We'll bring in 3 this year. Sometimes we bring in 3, sometimes we bring in 4. And we want to place them at top schools, just like an MBA program wants to play, because then that helps us recruit new students, because the first thing students ask are, where did your graduating students go, right? And so if you're going to go to a top school, they're going to want to train you to go to a top school. And so a lot of people make the mistake of trying to get into a good school even though they just want to be a teacher, which is fine, and it's a great and noble profession, but that's not what a top-tier research PhD is all about. And so you're hurting yourself because you're not going to get the things that you need, and then you hurt your program if you don't go. But a lot of people will come into a program, and like I said before, it's kind of a mystery. It's like black box. What's a PhD all about?
Which is why we're here.
And they get into the program, and then they realize this research thing is not for me. And I know people that are very good researchers that they just don't love it. And you have to love it because it's so difficult and monotonous at times to do, and painstaking research. And the feedback that you get is often, we had a reviewer say we were the stupidest people on the planet who wrote to us. I mean, the feedback you get is 90% of the feedback you get on research is negative, right? And so we take care in celebrating people's successes. I mean, even if you just get a paper done and submitted, we have a celebration, right? It's like you have to celebrate. You get an R&R, right? A revise and resubmit. The top tier journals publish 5% of the stuff that they got. So you're talking about 95% gets rejected. But you can't, as a tenure track faculty, publish 5% of your work. So you have to have a much better hit rate than that to get one every year. Now, it doesn't have to be one every year, but on average, because you get, in your 6th year, you would go up for tenure. So let's say you're a brand new PhD, you get your job. In the fall of your 6th year, you're going to go up for tenure, which means you put together a portfolio of your work. It's a huge dossier, and then you submit that, and then we request outside letters from experts in the field, in particular, like in your field. So people that did corporate governance research were my letter writers. And those people then, you don't know who they are. You can have some input into, some potential people. And so we send those out, and then we get letters. And those letters are supposed to talk about what you've done for the field. And it's only 5 years, right? I mean, and most papers, when they're accepted, they're still in the queue. They don't get published. Now, we're lucky that, with online, and DOIs and those kinds of things, which give your paper a number, which you can follow when it gets published. And Google Scholar has helped. But, it used to be that a journal came out in print. There was no online. And so, you wouldn't have many citations when you went up for tenure. So it was all about, do people in the field know who you are? And have you made some kind of contribution to the field? And those letters are not always kind to people. And so a lot of tenure hinges on not just your publication record, but what those outside letters say. And so, it's very scary when you don't have tenure, because it's still kind of a mystery what happens in that tenure process, because it goes to a committee, and then it goes to your department head, and then those are votes all the way up the line. It goes to the dean, it goes to the provost, it goes all the way to the board of regents, and it's a long process. So I just went through the full process, and it's the same thing. So it's the next step. So you go from assistant, and then if you get tenure, then you typically associate and promotion to tenure. So typically it's tenure and a promotion to associate. Sometimes people come in as associate and they're not tenured yet, typically for a pay issue, but that's pretty rare. So you go from assistant, and then that takes about 5-6 years, and then you'd go from associate then to full, and it takes another 6, 7, sometimes 10 years to get there. So once you have tenure, it's you feel that you have your job. You're pretty comfortable. Before you have tenure, it's pretty scary. And so, your career hinges on what other people are deciding about your papers.
And if you don't get tenure at a school, there's really not a job for you there, most likely. You might be able to go non-tenure track there, but most likely you're going to need to leave that school. So there's a lot really riding on getting that tenure.
Right. And it's, if you're not, so let's say you're not really making progress, and you're a good teacher, you could stay and talk about, become a lecturer, but the pay is going to be basically cut in half, and you're going to teach a lot more classes. And so if you like to do research, you're not going to be able to stay and do that and do research and try to build up your portfolio to go somewhere else. So you have to go somewhere else, and typically you're going to have to take a step down in terms of the quality of the research side of that school. Sometimes if you've had nothing hit for your first couple of years, and then you have some publications hit toward the end, you just don't have enough to get tenure at that school, another school will hire you because they see your trajectory. But we can't give someone tenure that doesn't, there's no magic number. There's no black and white set of objectives or criteria, but it's got to be a combination of everything you do, but you have to have five or six publications in the top journals.
Yeah. I went a different path so that people know that there are alternative paths. I came to A&M as a lecturer and taught here for, I think it was about 5 or 6 years before I started a PhD program. And I did my PhD in education and human resource development, which was a great program. It was a part-time program, though. I was working full-time and doing that program. And I knew that it would not lead to tenure in a business school. So a couple of things for people to think about. One, if you want tenure in a business school, you need to have a degree in business or something very, very similar. There are a few these are not the norm. These are the exceptions. A few economics or law, something like that, but it's closely related. Your research is in business. And so basically, you have to have a degree in business or closely related to get tenure, to get a tenure track position in a business school. And you can't get your degree from the same school where you want to work. Right. So that's another misconception people have, or something people don't know. Mm-hmm. If you want to come work at A&M, you can't get your PhD from A&M. And
you could come back.
You could come back.
But you'd have to have tenure somewhere else. Exactly.
Yeah,
you'd have to be established in the field.
Yeah, you can't get your first job at Texas A&M. You'd have to go somewhere else, and then you could come back.
Right.
And even then, the odds of being able to say, I want to go to school X, and then I want to go to school X, and then when I graduate, I want to go work at school X, is really, really slim, because how many people are you hiring each year for tenure track positions?
We don't hire every year. So we are hiring this year, but we don't hire every year.
Right. And the years that you are hiring, it's maybe 1 or 2.
Right.
And it may not be one or two that are coming in as new assistant professors. So that can be really tricky too. Just the number of positions that are available at each school is really small. So the likelihood of you saying, I mean, it has happened. We've done it in accounting a few times where someone will say, I'm going to go to UT or I'm going to go to Michigan State because I want to come back and go to Texas and because I want to go back and work at Texas A&M. And we'll say, okay, good luck. You know, the odds of that are like this. And it happens on occasion, but it's pretty rare. So you wouldn't want to come if you want a chance of working at Texas A&M, you wouldn't want to come and do a PhD in business here. If you want to initially work at Texas A&M, like you said, you could go get tenure somewhere else and then come back to Texas A&M if there's.
But it's pretty rare. Those cases are pretty rare.
Sure. But it happens. You went back to Michigan State, for example, where you had gotten your PhD.
Right.
And we have people do that, certainly. So I knew going into my PhD that it was not going to result in a tenure track position. If I wanted to go tenure track, I would need to leave Texas A&M and likely be in a college of education or human resource development or something like that, again, in that more closely related to that field.
Right.
And then I would have similar research expectations to publish in top-tier journals, usually about 5 publications a year, not necessarily all in top-tier journals, but 5 publications a year, some of those in top-tier journals, and that would be the expectation. So I decided to go a different path and teach a little bit more. Right now I'm doing more administration than teaching, but do more service or teaching, and then I do research kind of on the side as a hobby. But I didn't think that I would like the research as much as I do. And had I known how much I would like doing the research, I might have gone into a different program or thought about the path a little bit differently. But again, you don't know. It's kind of a black box.
Know, right. And that's one of the things that I keep thinking that we should do as a field is train people in advance. So there are some schools that do that. So Brigham Young has like a pre-PhD program. And so we have a lot of students that have gone to BYU because they understand what a PhD is, and then they come out. And there's a school in South Korea that does the same thing. And so we get a lot of students from that school. We get a lot of students from BYU because they actually know what a PhD is, and they're not surprised when they get here.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody's surprised at the level of work, but they're not surprised about the research perspective.
And Dr. Nate Sharp, I think, started a class in account. I know he did. He did start a class in accounting that is designed for that kind of a pre-PhD class. This is what it's like. And I think finance is working on a program right now that would be sort of a pre-PhD program to think about, get the right skills.
Because we've been talking about trying to do something at Mays. And so at some point, we're going to hope that we can do that, or at least have some kinds of meetings with students so that they understand and have like, this is what a seminar is about. This is what we do.
Right. And a PhD program requires a certain level of statistic capabilities, and not everybody knows that either coming in. So there are some courses as an undergrad that you can take that would benefit you in planning for a PhD.
The people that are the most prepared are the ones that come out of psychology because they understand what research is. And so if you think about industrial and organizational psychology, it's very similar to what we do in organizational behavior. So we actually do, several of our faculty would have IO psych degrees, but they be in the business school because our research is business related.
Right. You and I have talked about some of the research that you're doing with the, what is it called? Human Behavioral Lab?
Right.
Is that what it's called?
Yep. Yeah. The human. So that's biometrics. And so there's all kinds of things. We can do eye tracking, facial tracking, and galvanic skin response, and they have EEG helmets, and all kind of get inside people's brains. And so it's pretty cool stuff. And
a lot of it, whether it's behavioral or more of the lab side of psychology, a lot of your work is in psychology, and how are people behaving? What are they doing? What decisions are they making?
And so, there's a line so strategy started out basically from the military, right? And then it has a really heavy economics underpinning. And so, economists don't really think about people as people, right? They're supposed to be rational beings, and they're supposed to act in particular ways and make decisions that make sense from an economically rational perspective. And, I spent my whole career as a researcher showing that doesn't happen. The people don't act the way that you think they're going to act from a rational perspective. And so, but we don't exactly know why. And so getting into the lab and doing those kind of things are, really, really important things. But there's a whole stream of research that considers the firm and that firms act. And firms don't act. The people in the firms act, right? And so trying to understand why people make decisions, even though I didn't want to major in organizational behavior, I certainly understand the value and the psychological and the social psychological underpinnings of human behavior. And then behavior in teams. People act differently as individuals, as they do in groups, as they do in large collectives. And so that stuff has all been pretty fascinating to me. But it's all important. You can't just have a domain and just do research in that one domain and do good stuff.
So a quick summary. You're thinking about teaching at a business school. You need to think about, do you want to go tenure track or do you want to go non-tenure track? The pay is different, but the pay is different, but the responsibilities are different. So with a non-tenure track, you're going to be teaching a lot more. With a tenure track, you're going to be teaching a lot less and researching a lot more. With both, you're going to have some expectation for service, which might look different depending on kind of where you are in your career. And to get tenure, it's usually a 5 to 6 year process of publishing at a certain level, meeting expectations, and then going through that process.
Right.
And moving up from assistant to associate to full.
Exactly.
What are you looking for in an applicant to the PhD program here at Texas A&M?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that we look for is, do they understand the PhD program and what it's all about, and do they understand research? And it's gotten pretty competitive. There are a lot of good applicants who apply, and it's not just, obviously you have to have a threshold GMAT. It's got to be high 80s and 90s, but that's getting you in the door. It's getting you in the pile.
So high 80s and 90s percentiles?
Yeah.
And what is that roughly number-wise?
So, we're looking for something. It depends on your package, right? But it's got to be in the high 6s.
Yeah.
Or 7. Most of ours are average around in the 7s.
Right.
If you're really high, sometimes that's a red flag to us, right? We like it to be somewhere, let's say plus or minus 20 on the 700, right? Okay. Something like that. But it doesn't. We've had applicants with lower scores. They've had applicants with higher scores. If you went to a strong undergraduate school, that helps. It doesn't, because it balances some things out. Depends on, have you done research before? So when we get on the micro side, when we have applicants apply for OB or HR, we get a lot of psych people that come out of a psych degree, and they know how to do research, and maybe they've been on a conference presentation or sometimes have some papers that they've submitted. On the strategy side, it's very rare that we get someone unless they've gone to the program at BYU or NUS or something of that nature where they've had like a little PhD program, and then they've done undergraduate work with a professor. And so then we're going to bring in a student this year who is a strategy student who actually has, she submitted a paper to a conference, and that's kind of rare on the macro side. It's much harder to get strategy applicants than it is to get OBHR applicants, just for that reason, because there's really not kind of a training ground for them. So we look for those things. And we look for, we bring everybody out before we talk, we meet with them, or it might be word of mouth, right? I might have a colleague, and like Notre Dame doesn't have a PhD program. So I know some people that I work with at Notre Dame, and they'll say, hey, I got a great person in my MBA. So then, that's a good recommendation for us, and that feels comfortable. But we fly people out. Just like as we would job candidates, because it's that important to us. We make a huge, we're making a 5-year investment in these people, and we want them to be successful. And they, help us along the way too, right? I work now with students who have trained in the past as co-authors, and that's kind of fun to see.
Absolutely. So one other thing, when you're thinking about putting together an application for a PhD, one of my strongest recommendations, or even when you're just looking for a PhD program, is look at the faculty members in that school's research and know it well, and know if there's people in that program that you would like working with on their research.
Right. Well, and that's another thing, because you want to, and that's another thing that we look for that I didn't mention, is there a research fit? Are we going to be able to do something for you? And you might not know exactly, like I didn't know what I was going to do, but I kind of knew I wanted to do decision making right? So, but if you have an area, you're going to come in. Some people come in and they do that, and that's what they do, and they know what they want to research. Most people don't, but they kind of have like sort of quasi area that they're interested in. And if somebody came in here and we didn't have anybody that was doing that kind of research or in that area, then we wouldn't take that candidate because there'd be no synergy there. There'd be no value for them or for us. It'd just be better suited to go find a faculty member who you fit and who can help you.
What kind of stipend is given to PhD students, or what kind of financial support is given to them? You talked about the investment that we make in them for 5 years. Yeah. Well, and first, I should say, maybe we should have started with this. A PhD program typically takes 5 years to complete.
Right? We don't want to bring people in who want to get out in 4 years because it's just too hard to get your research. Yeah. And so right now, if we're going to hire someone or our students, we have students going out on the job market, you have to have, if you're on the micro side, you have to likely have 2 A publications already before
coming out of a
you
PhD
go on the job
program.
Market. Right. Or something that's really under advanced review that, like it's the 3rd or 4th round and it's probably going to hit. But you have to have 1. Now, obviously you're not going to be first author, at least. I don't know, some people end up with the second one where they're a first author. But you have to have those publications because when we hire someone, you have 5 years to get 5 publications. That doesn't give you any room for error. So if you come out with 2, you look a lot more attractive. It's like, okay, that's a little bit more doable. Plus, we know you can do it. Right? Now, we don't know if you can do it on your own. That's always a crapshoot because you just don't know, right? And frankly, when I came out, I didn't know if I could do it on my own either. So it's kind of scary at first.
Sure.
But so we're looking for that. On the strategy side, it takes a little longer. We can't do as many lab studies, and so the data is a little bit more difficult to get. So typically, we're looking for 1 for them or something under advanced review.
So you're paying them basically to research during that time.
Yeah, so we're paying them because we know that they have to. I mean, it's hard to take 5 years off with no pay. So you get your tuition, so you get 9 hours here, a semester, 6 in the summer, and so you're expected to be here all year. There's no summer off. So it's not like you can't take vacation, but you're expected to be here. It's a job, and we pay them right now. It's at $2,300 a month for 11 months. So faculty our pay is kind of strange too because we're on 9-month contracts. If you're a researcher and you're excellent in research according to our evaluation system, then you can qualify for 2 more months of pay, so you get 11 months. So we kind of mimic that same thing with our PhD programs or our PhD students. We give them 10 months of pay, and then if they're meeting their expectations, they get that 11-month pay.
Just so that people know, you are getting a stipend. It's not probably what you're making if you went out of undergrad and are working, but it is something. So thinking about that as far as what your quality of life is going to be, what you might need to do as far as additional financial aid, what you might need to save if you're working right now and thinking about coming back to a PhD program. There is a stipend. That you have to kind of cover your cost of living plus your tuition.
So your tuition's covered, and you have to pay a few fees like the student fee,
rec center and stuff like that,
health center or something. But by and large, everything's paid. Yep. And then you get your stipend, which is about $2,300. I think it's going up a little bit. Maybe it's $2,400 a month now. And you're not going to have a life, so you're not going to spend a lot of money.
Welcome to the PhD program.
You're going to work pretty hard for 5 years. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate you sharing the insights for students thinking about doing a PhD at Mays or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.